Hello. We are
Hello.
in Belmont, Massachusetts. I'm Gina Giorgio, Director of Strategy and Development for Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I'm a campaign educator for Yes on 4, which is psychedelic legalization, citizen-led ballot initiative in the state of Massachusetts, which is up for vote this November 5th. I am sitting with, maybe you can tell, Rick Doblin.
Hi, everybody.
We are in the home of Rick Doblin. Here to talk to you about Yes on 4. So
Yes.
Rick, you're a Massachusetts resident. Why do you think Massachusetts needs psychedelic legalization and decriminalization?
Well, I think the whole world needs psychedelic access and decriminalization and legalization. I start with this premise that the drug war is a fundamental violation of human rights, that it infringes on our ability to access certain spiritual states, just to change our consciousness. So when we think about the Bill of Rights, which hopefully will survive this presidential election, but one of the main ones is the freedom of religion, the freedom of the press, the freedom of speech. And you could say that all of these are dependent upon the freedom of thought. And so psychedelics, marijuana, other substances influence your ability to think in certain ways. So we should have this freedom of thought. And so why do we need drug policy reform here in Massachusetts? Because the drug war itself is fundamentally about persecuting minorities. It's never really been about addressing drug abuse problems. And so the Yes on 4, there's a lot of challenges. The Boston Globe just came out against it, and they were talking about how it's potentially risky. But I think when they came out against it, what they didn't really look at is the damage that the war on drugs is doing in the background. And that damage is so great that moving towards more access is got to be a good thing. So even though Yes on 4 has two parts, one is people can home grow certain things, and a lot of the criticism is, oh, that's going to be problematic and people are going to have difficult experiences. The other part is you can access certain plant medicines under supervision of trained guides. Now, these trained guides don't necessarily need to be licensed therapists, and you don't need to come with a diagnosis. You don't have to say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I got PTSD. You could say, I'm curious, and I just want to learn about what psychedelics are like, or I want a spiritual experience, or I want personal growth. So I think that Yes on 4 is a step towards a vast cultural transformation to move to a post-prohibition world. Okay. And that's what we really need to do. So I think you can see Yes on 4 as one of these incremental steps towards what I think is one of the worst policies that America has ever developed, which is the war on drugs. And the worst part of it is that the U.S., when it was really at its peak of power in the late 60s, early 70s, exported this drug policy all over the world. And so while the U.S. really helped spread the prohibitionist mindset, the U.S. can actually help undo it in the rest of the world as well. So much of the world is looking to the U.S. So even though we're behind Canada, which is federally legalized cannabis, we're sitting here in Massachusetts, which legalized medical marijuana, then legalized recreational or not. I don't like the word recreational because it's kind of pejorative, dismissive, hedonistic, reckless, heedless. I like celebratory, which is a little bit more
I like that.
positive. So we have that for cannabis here. And so Massachusetts is trying to follow in the line of, it began really with Denver making mushrooms the lowest enforcement priority, and then it moved to Berkeley, Oakland, Ann Arbor, other places, and then it moved to eventually Oregon Psilocybin Initiative, and then from there the Colorado Natural Plant Medicines, and now here we are with Massachusetts voting, and it's going to be close. I think a lot of reform movements take a long time to really make progress. So I guess I want to say that while it's close, it's a victory whether it wins or not, because we will have educated people, we'll brought it to the ballot, but we really do want it to pass. People have invested millions and millions of dollars already. So I think it's crucial that crucial but not essential, I guess you could say. And that if it fails, there will be a general sense, I think, that there needs to be other tries, but that we probably need to have psychedelics approved as medicines to change public attitudes by the FDA. And then, because I think these state level reforms have been inspired by the progress that's been made with the FDA, with the research with psychedelics and all the media articles and the scientific articles. So I think SN4 is a critical building block towards this increased access to psychedelics. Another reason that we need it is that the FDA recently rejected approving MDMA as a medicine. And I think without going into all the details, but I think it was more on political, cultural reasons rather than scientific reasons.
I've heard that too.
So what we need is MDMA, I think, will be delayed 2-3 years from being approved by the FDA, MDMA-assisted therapy of some kind. And people are suffering now, though. So one of my, we were talking a little bit earlier before we started recording about Gandhi, and there was actually this, Gandhi was the mentor for Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King had this incredible saying that Barack Obama borrowed, which was the fierce urgency of now.
Yeah.
And so when we think about that, people are suffering now. So the fact that the FDA has delayed MDMA by 2 to 3 years for mostly political reasons, even though MDMA is a synthetic, it's not part of natural plant medicines. Psilocybin is years away from being approved. I believe FDA will probably end up approving psilocybin in some way or another, but people are suffering now, so that we need to provide access to people. And unlike myself, there are a bunch of people that have a different attitude towards the law. And if something's illegal, they're not going to do it. I mean, I learned at a very young age that there's a difference between what's moral and what's legal. Yeah. And so that's when I was 17 and decided to become draft resistor. And the war in Vietnam was legal, but I didn't think it was moral. So I think there's a lot more people than we probably realize who are unwilling to break the law and who do suffer from depression, anxiety. And I think even though the Massachusetts initiative will be state legal and federally illegal, I think many more people will seek out healing, which they would not do if this initiative didn't pass.
I think you're right. And you said a big reason around why there's misconceptions, there's this political war, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Yeah. So people are afraid because of our stigmatized and sensationalized drug war history. So what are some common myths about psychedelic therapy that you want to debunk? Well,
I'd say that one of the main myths of psychedelic psychotherapy is that it's, this is a hard one to phrase properly, but that it's a criticism more of therapy in general, in a sense, that people think that the therapists are the ones that listen and then give you the insight. Yeah. That the therapists are the ones that do the healing. And, you know, by their training and by knowledge, and you get stuck in these patterns and they can see in an objective way, and you get these insights from the therapist. Now, that does happen, but I think the key thing about psychedelic therapy is that we're trying to help people learn about healing themselves. And so the therapeutic method that we've developed, which we call inner-directed therapy, it's about supporting whatever's emerging. So I think there's a big concern that people have who are not familiar with psychedelic therapy, but have heard about bad trips. Yeah. And people have, you know, difficult stuff comes up and it's really hard for them to handle and they feel like they're going crazy or the emotions are overwhelming. And so a lot of times people have this idea that when trips start getting difficult like that, it's going in the wrong way, and that you need to either stop it or pay attention to something else. So in psychedelic assisted therapy, and we say this as part of our Zendo psychedelic harm reduction project, that difficult is not the same as bad, and that it's resistance that makes something difficult into something bad. So a lot of times psychedelic therapy involves people processing really difficult experiences, but that they're able to do it. I think another misconception about psychedelic therapy is that people may think that the work is done while you're under the influence of the psychedelic. And that's true. A lot of work gets done under the influence of the psychedelic, but unless you do the integration work after, it's not going to last. Yeah. And you won't get the full benefits. So I think there's this tendency for people to look for a magic pill. Yeah. One dose, magic pill, you're cured. And it's not like that. So I think that the psychedelic therapy that we've developed and that other groups have also developed has preparation and integration in addition to the experience itself. And I think they tend to get undervalued sometimes.
It's a good point, because you may think that in that psychedelic experience, that's when you're going to get the realization, and it's oftentimes after. Yeah. After you've been able to sit with something and you're like, I recognize that pattern now, but I didn't in the moment.
Yeah. And even if you do have it in the moment, then you can, does it stick? And do you elaborate on it? And then do you act on it? I think there's another part about psychedelic therapy that people may have misconceptions about. And it's what the therapists themselves and the researchers are talking about, the transdiagnostic properties of psychedelic therapy. So we tend to think, we're treating depression, and this is the things you need for depression. Oh, over here is the things you need for anxiety. And over here is the things you need for PTSD. And over here is the things you need for eating disorders. And over here is for obsessive. But actually, there's sort of common roots, so that people are learning that psychedelic-assisted therapy has broad implications for a wide range of clinical indications, which is really unusual. And that I think one of the biggest issues that people have with psychedelic therapy is that they often confuse this idea that as the symptoms may seem to be getting worse during this period when you're under the influence of the psychedelics. And they may actually be getting worse, meaning that you're more scared, you're more depressed. But this idea is that Stan Grof has said this beautiful thing, which is that the full experience of an emotion is the funeral pyre of that emotion. And what that means is that life has changed. When you fully open up to, I'm going to be stuck forever in this psychedelic state, I'm going to be crazy forever, and that it'll never change, and I'm stuck here for all eternity. Once you fully accept that, then it changes. Yeah. So this idea that symptoms that seem like they're getting worse can actually be a sign that you're moving towards resolution, that things that have been overwhelming and suppressed, that once you let them up, then you're able to really process them. The other thing I would just add, I don't know that people really have this much of a misconception, but there were times where when psychedelic trips would get bad, people would think about tranquilizing. They would use tranquilizers. This is back in the 60s. Or even when your trip gets difficult, if you're having trips and you think, this is too much for me, I need to drown it out with alcohol or take a tranquilizer. One of the things we've learned is that only makes things worse. It freezes things in place. And you get the subconscious message, I can't handle it. I let stuff up and open, and it's too much for me. And so I think this, not to tranquilize something, even if you just sit through for a period of time and hold on, that's better than tranquilizing something, because you know you can endure it. And then I also think one of the biggest misconceptions, in a way, is that there's something fundamentally different between psychedelic therapy and recreational use. So one of our funders who used to work for MAPS said during the 80s, during the AIDS epidemic, he was gay. He said a lot of his friends were dying, and that they worked out their grief on the dance floor with ecstasy.
I've heard this.
Yeah, so is that therapeutic? So there's a lot of therapeutic processing that can take place in contexts like a rave. Yeah. Now, it's important that you feel safe. This is just another story, but about 15, 20 years ago, we were contacted by two women in the same week. Both of them had done MDMA or ecstasy at raves, and both of them had remembered prior sexual abuse, assault in their lives. One woman was with a bunch of friends who only wanted to party, and she felt that they didn't want to hear this kind of stuff. So she stuffed her emotions down And she contacted us saying, I took ecstasy and I feel worse. It was months and months ago and I still feel worse. The other woman, the same week though, said, similar story, but she said, I was with a girlfriend. The sexual abuse stuff came up. We went off into a corner. I talked about it for an hour, worked through a lot of it, felt a lot better, went and danced the rest of the night. And now I felt that, MDMA could be good for PTSD, but I didn't think anybody knew that. So I did a Google search, MDMA for PTSD, and it led me to MAPS. I knew you were doing that. So I think there's this bright line, in a way, that people make between psychedelic therapy and non-medical recreational celebratory use.
Yeah.
And I think one of the criticisms of Yes on 4 is that it's got two parts. One part is supervised access under guides with some sort of training approved by the state for people that have diagnosis or just want personal growth. And this idea that is somehow in contrast to home grow, and that you could grow it on your own and you could take it without any supervision at all. So how do we reconcile having those two parts of a bill stuck together? So beforehand, we were talking about a lot of the opposition is to this home grow and personal use. And it is a difficult thing to say that on the one hand, to medicalize, to go through the FDA, even to work with the guides for, under supervision, that you're saying that these drugs are very powerful, they are can potentially bring things to the surface, and you should only be taking them in this context under supervision of trained people. On the other hand, you should be able to buy them on your own, the way that right near in my house, we could go a couple miles in about maybe 3-4 miles, and we could have multiple marijuana dispensaries that we could get marijuana for any purpose. And so I think that we get back to what I was saying at the very beginning, that the drug war itself is so destructive and so harmful. Mass incarceration, which we're coming out of, and violence and corruption all over the world. And it's just incredible. So I think you can tell a complex message that the drug war is so bad, we need to move towards some legal access. And at the same time, psychedelics, the outcomes can be safer and more effective when it's administered under supervision. And so I think both of those can be true at the same time. But the risks of doing it without being in proper supervision are greater than the risks of doing it in these trained guides. But what are we trying to correct for? A massively oppressive and counterproductive drug war.
Hi, I'm Jonah Martindale. I'm a co-organizer on some of the grassroots outreach for the Vote Yes on 4 bill for Massachusetts. And as before, this is still Rick Doblin. So, we talked a lot about some of the background and some of the sort of strategy aspects and information out there on this bill. So it was about 4 years. It was 4 years ago when one of the first psychedelic assisted therapy measures became legal in Oregon. Since then, we've seen a similar one in Colorado. So how do you think Massachusetts is or is not well positioned to sort of follow in the footsteps of those states?
Yeah, well, Massachusetts is known for being one of the homes of medical innovation. Massachusetts is also a more progressive state. We have incredible coverage for medical insurance. I think we might be the state that has the highest percentage of population covered by insurance. That the state has provided all these additional incentives as well. Not only that, but Massachusetts has a highly educated population, a literate population. It's a large state, and so we often have been a leader in New England and other places. So I think that if Yes on 4 passes, one of the consequences is likely to be a substantial increase in research at the major medical institutions in the Massachusetts state into research in psychedelics. So I think we've got more of a research base here than many other states. And I think that we're not really a leader in this because it has happened in Oregon, it's in Colorado, but we are on the forward edge of a lot of different things. And so I think because we have such widespread coverage of health insurance, we're also able to say that if a Yes on 4 passes, and if there are problems, people are likely to be able to get treatment and support for that. We have a large number of students here, as you know, and so students do tend to experiment with psychedelics and with other things. And so it's especially important that Yes on 4 passes so that this experimentation can be done with more and more people learning about how do you support others with psychedelics, the training of these guides, the centers that are going to be set up. I think Massachusetts is really an ideal state to experiment with Yes on 4. Also, because there's so many people here that do research of different kinds, even policy research, we'll be able to really track. There will be enough brain power and research to really track what are the implications of Yes on 4. What can we learn for other states? So this is, I think, an ideal state to have this experiment take place.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and some of the top colleges in the country are in Massachusetts. And then another thing is some of the opposition to this bill. They've been talking about how, there's not enough specifications of how to make it financially accessible. What about costs? But the bit you brought up about insurance, that's a great point, that there's already good insurance systems in place.
Well, a lot of times insurance doesn't do a great job covering mental health, and it doesn't do a great job covering therapy either. And I think a lot of the insurance coverage will really only come after FDA approval. But I think that there is ridiculous arguments about, it's going to cost a lot, so therefore it shouldn't be approved. The cost of criminalization is so high that, yes, it's true that it costs a lot because it's labor intensive, but this information will sort of filter out into the community in terms of peer support. People will be college students should be learning about how to navigate these experiences, particularly when they get difficult. There can be peer support. So I think the cost is, it's kind of a ridiculous argument to be against it. And also one would presume that the cost will go down over time. But one of the problems or the limitations is that these costs are figured on the basis of individual therapy. And group therapy is going to be one of the major ways to reduce the costs and to try, but there's not been a whole lot of research on group therapy yet.
Interesting.
But when you think about the Native American church, the peyote, the ayahuasca, they do it in groups. And so the traditional indigenous use is there are sometimes individual sessions, but there's often group sessions. So I think they're kind of ignoring when they talk about the costs, they're thinking in terms of individual therapy, not group therapy. And in any case, things start out expensive, and then over time, particularly if they show their value, then more and more people want to do it, and then the costs go down.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so, right now we're kind of neck and neck in the polls, some of the latest polling, but there's a pretty big percentage point. Like last I checked, it was about 14% sort of undecided voters demographic. So, what would you have to say to people who are sort of in that demographic? They could potentially go either way. Maybe they don't care too much, but what's something you would communicate to them about this bill?
Well, I think first off, it would be to try to understand, when people are undecided, what is their assessment of the risk? What is their assessment of the benefits? So, of course, I'm in favor of Yes on 4, but I would encourage them to really look more closely at what their concerns are, and then look more closely, if they can, at the research that talks about the benefits. And I think under this kind of regulated system with trained guides of training of some support, now it's not training for years and years and years, so some of the criticism is these people are not necessarily going to be as well trained as licensed therapists. I think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for people that are undecided, think about your friends and people that you know that need mental health support. And the difference between getting it in underground illegal settings versus getting it in these legal settings. Not everybody's going to charge all that much money. I mean, it should be made available, and there will be people that will work for students and others at bargain prices or pro bono for free. But I think for those people that are undecided, the real issue is just, what are your questions? What are your hopes and fears? And I'd say talk it over with your friends and try to think about, it's much harder to get an initiative where you want people to vote yes to pass than if you want them to vote no. It's just that people are resistant to change.
Interesting.
So that it's hard to be on the yes side when yes is change. Because you're going into the unknown. But I think for those people that are undecided, really think about the consequences of what we face by this whole system of prohibition. Now, we're just talking about psychedelics. It doesn't change everything for all the different drugs, but it's a step towards demonized drugs that have been said to be very dangerous, and they do have their dangers, but coming up from the underground, being used in more controlled settings. And so it's something that I think can be illustrative of what might happen with other dangerous drugs. I would suggest for people who are undecided to really just do more research. I mean, that's what students are all about, doing research. So I'm sure that you can talk to the various SSDP chapters, and Betty Aldrich has been working on the drugstore to try to help people understand about drugs. So I think go to your peers at SSDP.
So what would you have to say to people who feel that, in elections or bill initiatives that, their vote doesn't matter, that it's already sort of predetermined and one vote won't make that much of a difference?
Well, I think that there's some fundamental errors in that kind of thinking. So I think first off, your vote will matter to you. That you're not an observer on the world isn't happening to you, but you are part of it. And if you actually vote and take some action, that will have an impact on you. That you're choosing to participate, you're choosing to be involved, you're choosing to exercise your freedom to vote, which many people in the world don't have. Okay, then I can understand. In a world of, a country of America where, I don't know if it's 340 million people, something like that, probably there'll be 150 million or something people voting.
Bless you. Bless you.
Yeah, so maybe you can.
That's gonna be the opening.
But there'll be 150 million people voting.
Yeah.
So you can say, my vote is trivial. It doesn't really matter. And I think there's a couple things that are wrong with that. As I said, first off, it'll matter to you. But secondly, it will matter to your friends that they know that you're voting. When you vote, other people will think maybe they should vote as well. And just think of how many people are in your situation that are thinking my vote doesn't matter. There could be millions and millions. I think in particular, young people vote at a much lower rate than old people vote.
Yes.
But young people are going to suffer more than old people from climate change, from the way the world is moving more conservative. The challenges, I lived in Sarasota, Florida for 17 years.
Yeah.
And friends of mine have just had 2 hurricanes within a couple of weeks. And this is the new normal. So I think we can impact these bigger factors. I think this idea that the world is going on without us and there's nothing we can do is really a misunderstanding of the dynamics, because we all are part of different groups, and there's lots and lots of people that think their vote doesn't matter. The other part of it is that there is this as we know, everything is skewed. America is not really democratic anymore because of the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about majority rules for who gets to be the president.
Right.
And so there is something that has really been clear over the last bunch of elections is that the Democrats have, in general, won the popular vote,
Yeah.
even if they have lost the presidency because of the Electoral College. But that's been kind of a break, you could say, on extremism to some sense, if the vote, the popular vote, is different than the Electoral College.
Right.
So let's say you're in Massachusetts, for example, and we're trying to talk to people about Yes on 4. Massachusetts is a Democratic state. It's not a swing state. And people would think, oh, my vote doesn't really matter. But the more that you show support for the whoever, and now I don't want to say that everybody's for the Democrats, but the more that you show support for whoever you care about, the more that we are engaged in the public sphere, the more you're saying it's a bit of self-efficacy. It's like exercise in a way. You exercise your democratic right, then you may be more comfortable speaking up about other things. And this is an incredibly close election.
Yeah.
And so everybody's vote does matter. There are, how possibly, what we were told is that in 2020, if somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 votes were changed in some of the swing states, Biden would have lost. It's incredible. In 150, 160 million votes, 75,000 votes in the right spaces could have changed the election.
Wow.
So I think it's important to realize that the votes matter to the collective, but just think of yourself. There's a powerlessness from saying, my vote doesn't matter. And there's something empowered about saying, I will vote, I will express my opinion, I will be involved, and I'll try to get my friends to be involved. So it's about, do you want to feel empowered or disempowered?
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.